1899, in the Ural Mountains of Russia, a mining operation turned up a fossil that nobody knew what to do with. It was a coiled spiral of teeth, a perfect wheel, like something machined rather than grown, embedded in limestone. No skull, no vertebrae, no body attached at all. Just this impossible clockwork of serrated blades, sitting in the rock as if something had built it and then forgotten to attach it to an animal. Paleontologists named it Helicoprion, and then spent the next 113 years arguing about what it actually was. To understand why Helicoprion was possible, you have to understand what the Permian oceans were, and the honest answer is that they were nothing like today. The Permian period, which ran from roughly 299 to 252 million years ago, was a world before modern fish dominated the seas. Before the lineages of sharks we recognize today had really found their footing. The oceans were full of experiments, of body plans and hunting strategies that evolution was testing, failing, refining, or in some cases running with for tens of millions of years before discarding them entirely. Helicoprion emerged somewhere around 290 million years ago. It wasn't technically a shark, though it looked like one at a glance. The most current research places it within the Chimera lineage, the same broad group as the ghostly, deep-sea ratfish that still inhabit modern oceans today. In terms of body plan, it was built like a heavily built shark, probably 10 to 15 feet long, possibly reaching 20 feet in the largest individuals. Streamlined, muscular, built for open water. The body was consistent with other successful predators of its era. Nothing about the trunk, fins, or general silhouette would have looked out of place in a Permian sea. By every external measure, it looked like a successful, unremarkable predator. And it was for about 40 million years. But none of that is why anyone remembers it. They remember it for the teeth. The tooth whorl, the official term, was a continuous spiral of teeth that grew from a single point, spiraling outward as the animal aged. Older teeth in the center, newer teeth on the outside, in a coil that could grow to 1/2 meter or more across in large adults. Each individual tooth in the whorl was serrated, curved, and built for cutting. Not merely pointed like a pin, but shaped with the same precision as a carving blade. In a large specimen, you might be looking at 150 or more individual teeth arranged in a perfect spiral, every one of them sharp, every one of them part of a continuous mechanical structure that had no equivalent anywhere else in the vertebrate world. There was nothing like it in any other animal, living or extinct. It is, to this day, the most structurally bizarre dental arrangement ever documented in the fossil record. Here's where things get genuinely strange. When scientists first found Helicoprion's tooth whorl, they had no jaw specimen to go with it. No skull, no context, no indication of where exactly in the animal's anatomy this spiral of teeth was housed. And in the absence of evidence, imagination tends to fill the gap, often badly. The earliest reconstructions, produced in the early 1900s, placed the whorl at the very tip of the snout, a rotating buzzsaw protruding from the front of the face like a nose with ambitions. The animal was drawn looking like something a medieval illustrator would conjure after hearing a confusing second-hand description of a shark. Later, reconstructions moved the whorl to the lower jaw, but positioned it rotating outward from the tip of the chin, curving forward like a plow or a boar's tusk. Others placed it inside the mouth, but couldn't agree on the angle. Some researchers proposed the spiral was entirely external, used to rake the seafloor for prey. None of these reconstructions had solid jaw anatomy to support them because solid jaw anatomy didn't exist in the fossil record yet. This went on for over a century. And what makes it particularly remarkable is that Helicoprion wasn't obscure. This was not a fossil found once in a remote quarry and then forgotten. The same animal, or close relatives, turned up on every inhabited continent except Antarctica. Fossils recovered from Russia, North America, Australia, China, Japan, and Norway. The tooth whorl, wherever it appeared, was distinctive enough that nobody ever confused it with anything else. Scientists just couldn't agree on what the animal had done with it. By the mid-20th century, Helicoprion had become one of the longer-standing embarrassments in vertebrate paleontology, not because the fossils were poorly preserved, but because the most important piece of context was consistently absent: the jaws. Without jaw cartilage to show how the whorl connected to the rest of the skull, every reconstruction was essentially informed guesswork, and the guesses, reviewed in hindsight, ranged from merely incorrect to genuinely surreal. A creature that had left its signature across the entire Permian world simply refused to explain how it worked. In 2013, a team at the Idaho Museum of Natural History solved it. The key was a specimen that had been sitting in a museum collection for years, a rare example of Helicoprion with partial jaw cartilage still preserved alongside the whorl. Researcher Leif Tapanila and his colleagues ran CT scans through it, building a three-dimensional model of the jaw anatomy for the first time. What they found ended 113 years of debate in a single paper. The whorl sat at the back of the lower jaw, not the tip of the snout, not curving outward from the chin, deep inside the mouth, positioned at the rear of the mandible like a gear installed at the base of the throat. And crucially, the upper jaw had no teeth at all, not worn down, not lost post-mortem, absent by design. Helicoprion's entire dental investment, every tooth it ever grew across its entire lifespan, was concentrated in that single spiraling structure in the lower jaw. The implication was immediate. This wasn't a cutting or raking tool, it was a processing mechanism. When Helicoprion closed its mouth, the whorl rotated backward, like a conveyor belt running toward the throat, drawing whatever it had bitten into toward the esophagus while the blades sliced continuously. Prey didn't just get bitten, it got fed through. Reconstructing the hunting behavior from jaw mechanics requires some inference, but the geometry is fairly instructive. Helicoprion's most likely prey were the soft-bodied cephalopods that dominated Permian seas, ancestors of modern squid and nautiloids, some of them large, all of them slippery and difficult to hold onto with a standard set of teeth. The whorl solves this problem elegantly. Grab a squid with the front of the jaws, close the mouth, and the rotating whorl drags it backward and slices it simultaneously. There's no fumbling, no prey escaping toward the front of the mouth while the predator tries to reposition. The mechanics of the jaw do the work. What makes this particularly impressive is the tooth economics. Most sharks shed teeth continuously. It's actually one of the things that makes sharks so evolutionarily efficient, since a lost tooth is simply replaced within days or weeks, and the animal never has a gap in its arsenal. Helicoprion didn't shed anything. The whorl was permanent and self-building, with each new tooth growing at the outer edge and pushing the older teeth inward and downward, coiling them into the center of the spiral. Nothing was discarded. Nothing was lost. Every tooth Helicoprion ever grew was still there, in sequence, in the coil. The animal's entire dental history was stored in that structure. A large Helicoprion specimen with a whorl 45 centimeters across was carrying teeth it had grown as a juvenile, still intact, curled into the base of the spiral and present for its entire lifespan. Think about what that means mechanically. The whole apparatus had to remain functional, structurally sound and properly positioned in the jaw, as it continuously grew larger across the animal's lifetime. The jaw had to accommodate an ever-expanding spiral of permanent teeth without losing its geometry or its hunting function. That this worked at all is impressive. That it worked for 40 million years is something else entirely. Here's the detail that tends to stop people. Helicoprion didn't just thrive in the Permian, it survived the Permian extinction. The event that occurred 252 million years ago, the largest mass extinction in the history of complex life on Earth, the one that killed somewhere between 90 and 96% of all marine species, and Helicoprion made it through to the other side. The Permian-Triassic extinction, also called the Great Dying, was not a gradual decline. It was a collapse so severe and so complete that the oceans went functionally silent for millions of years afterward. The dominant predators of the Permian seas, the large cephalopods, the placoderms, entire groups that had been stable for tens of millions of years, were wiped out almost simultaneously. The marine invertebrate fauna that formed the base of most food chains dropped by an estimated 96%. Whatever food chains had supported Helicoprion before the extinction simply stopped existing. And yet the genus persisted into the early Triassic. Not in great diversity, and not for particularly long after the extinction boundary. The last Helicoprion fossils date to about 250 million years ago, a couple of million years into the recovery period. But it survived the crossing. It crossed the line that ended the Permian world and came out moving on the other side. In an ocean that lost nearly all of its large predators at once, Helicoprion kept going. The leading theory is flexibility, an animal that had evolved to process soft-bodied prey efficiently, specifically the cephalopods that were among the more resilient groups in the immediate post-extinction interval, was better positioned than specialists when the food web shattered. When almost everything dies, being able to eat almost anything that's left matters more than being perfectly adapted to a menu that no longer exists. The whorl, which might have looked like an over-engineered solution to a simple problem in the late Permian, may have been the exact feature that brought those extra few million years of survival. There's a version of Helicoprion's story that's just a curiosity, a weird animal with a bizarre jaw that confused scientists for a century. And that version isn't wrong. But there's another version that's harder to dismiss. Helicoprion existed for roughly 40 million years. For context, the entire evolutionary history of Homo sapiens is about 300,000 years long. Humans and our closest relatives, including every hominin species that ever existed, have collectively been on Earth for maybe 3 million years. Helicoprion's genus, from its first appearance in the fossil record to the last confirmed specimen, spans more than 10 times that entire history. Every civilization ever built, every language ever spoken, every war ever fought, all of human recorded history occupies roughly the last 5,000 years. Helicoprion was already 15 million years into its run before that clock even started. It survived one of the 5 great mass extinctions. It spread to every ocean on the planet. It produced a jaw structure that no other animal in 500 million years of vertebrate evolution has independently arrived at. And then it disappeared quietly in the early Triassic, leaving behind nothing but coiled spirals of teeth in rocks on 6 continents, waiting 250 million years to be misidentified, argued over, and finally understood by a species that had the audacity to show up only very recently. The mystery of Helicoprion was never really about the teeth. It was about what the teeth revealed, that evolution doesn't build to a template, that the boundary between functional and impossible shifts every time you find something new in the rock, and that the Permian oceans were doing things with vertebrate anatomy that we are still, more than a century after the first fossil was pulled from that Russian mine, genuinely struggling to categorize. That is why nothing about Helicoprion was normal, and that, it turns out, is exactly the point.